Right now in South Korea, people are having a full-blown ideological meltdown over a lunchbox. Yes, you heard that right. Not a political scandal, not a stock market crash, but a plastic container filled with rice, seaweed, and sausages cut to look like tiny octopuses. It sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? Imagine being so deep into internet culture that you look at a mother making a nice meal for her kid and think, quote, wow, what a tragic oppressed victim of a broken system, end quote. But that is exactly where we are. This whole thing started when some folks in Korea looked across the sea at Japan and decided to offer some very loud, very unsolicited pity for Japanese women. They saw these mothers waking up at 5 in the morning to craft these edible masterpieces and called it a tragedy. They called it a form of conscription, like these women were being forced into a kitchen-based draft. And as you can imagine, the Japanese mothers didn't exactly say thank you for the concern. They fired back, calling this pity venomous and accusing the Korean side of lacking any sense of what it means to actually care for someone. It's a border war fought with rice balls and insults, and honestly, the deeper you look, the more insane it gets. But why would anyone actually go out of their way to demand that a lunchbox be seen as a tool of oppression? Why is a sandwich not just a sandwich anymore? Well, when you peel back the lid, you realize this isn't about nutrition at all. It's about a ruthless, hyper-competitive fight for survival in a society where every single minute of your day is treated like a commodity. In South Korea, the push for efficiency has become a literal religion. Everything has to be faster, cheaper, and handled by the state or a company. So, when these modern critics look at a Japanese bento, they aren't seeing a mother's love. They are seeing labor waste. They are doing the math in their heads and deciding that 2 hours spent carving a carrot into a flower is 2 hours of unpaid work that could have been spent grinding for a promotion or just not doing that. The blunt reality here is that this pity is actually a preemptive strike. See, in Korea, there's been this massive movement to deconstruct every traditional role a woman might have. They call it escaping the corset, and part of that involves making sure that nobody ever expects them to go back to the old ways. So, if they admit that a Japanese mother making a cute bento is actually a nice, loving thing to do, it creates a standard. It creates a level of care that might be expected of them one day, and in a world where everyone is fighting for their share of the financial pie and trying to avoid the double burden of a career and a home, that standard is a threat. They have to call it pitiful to make sure no one ever asks them to do it. It's a face-saving maneuver disguised as a human rights movement. They are basically saying, quote, we aren't being lazy or cold, end quote. We are being liberated from your primitive, labor-heavy rituals. So, what's the actual difference between these two worlds? Why does Japan still do this while Korea has moved on to industrial-scale school lunches? It comes down to two completely different ways of existing. Japan is obsessed with the idea of effort. They have this concept of perfectionism, where the struggle itself is the point. If you didn't struggle to make it, does it even count? A mother waking up before the sun to make a lunchbox that looks like a Studio Ghibli movie is seen as a hero because she navigated the difficulty for her child's sake. It's a high-stakes performance of social status. If your kid shows up with a boring plain lunch, they might actually get bullied. The bento is a vessel of love, sure, but it's also a mandatory social tax. You have to pay it in hours of sleep and finger cramps from using tweezers on sesame seeds. On the other hand, you have the Korean mindset, which is all about the hurry culture. If the school can provide a nutritionally balanced hot meal for a couple of bucks, why on earth would a mother waste her life making a cute box? Efficiency is God here. The state handles the care, the mother goes to work, and the child eats a standardized meal. It's logical, it's clean, and it's completely industrial. But here's the kicker. When you turn care into a service provided by the government, you lose the language of personalized effort. You start to see any act of service as a burden or oppression. But let's ask the next logical question. What happened when people actually got exactly what they asked for? What happens when you finally liberate everyone from the labor of care? You get a weird, hollowed-out version of a family. The irony is staggering. You have people claiming they are free because they don't have to make lunch. Yet they are more stressed and lonelier than ever. They've successfully outsourced their love to a cafeteria. And then they wonder why the emotional infrastructure of their society is crumbling. They pity the Japanese women for being enslaved to their kitchens, but they are just as enslaved to the cold, hard logic of the market. Everything has a price tag, and if an action doesn't have a direct ROI, it's discarded as labor waste, and this is where the hypocrisy really starts to sting. These critics claim they are protecting women's rights, but they are actually attacking the very idea of nurturing. They've created this defensive isolation where any traditional act of kindness is seen as a betrayal of the movement. It's like they are so afraid of being trapped that they've built a cage of their own, one where they can't even perform. A simple, useless act of love without checking to see if it's politically correct. Think about the fallout here. By attacking the Bento, they've managed to alienate an entire generation of mothers across the sea. The Japanese response wasn't just, quote, "we like our lunchboxes," end quote. It was a total excommunication. They looked at the Korean discourse and labeled it as child-hating and venomous. Now, in the Japanese imagination, the modern Korean woman isn't seen as a liberated hero. She's seen as a fierce, cold individual who has lost her humanity. It's a digital rift that's only getting wider because everyone is fighting. To keep their own social contract intact, Japanese women don't want to hear that their sacrifices are wasteful because that would mean their whole lives have been a mistake. And Korean women don't want to hear that their efficiency is cold because that would mean they've traded their souls for a bit of extra sleep and a paycheck. We see the same madness everywhere, honestly. It's not just an Asian thing. Look at the almond moms in the States or the way parents in the United Kingdom get fined for putting a bag of chips in a lunchbox. The lunchbox has become the ultimate battlefield for how we should be raised. Is parenting something the state should regulate with efficiency and health standards? Or is it a messy, personalized cultural tradition? We are obsessed with who has to fill the box and how much the labor costs. But we've forgotten that the box itself is supposed to be a connection between two people. If this continues, where does it end? We're looking at the future, where the art of the lunchbox becomes a lost relic like some ancient form of calligraphy. We'll have perfectly efficient children raised by state-certified systems and liberated adults who don't have to waste a single second on anyone else. We'll have a world of empty boxes. There's this old story about a strategist who received an empty food container from a warlord. It was a message. Quote, "I have no more place for you at my table," end quote. The strategist took his own life because he knew he had no future. That is exactly what this Bento war feels like. One side is handing an empty box to the next generation and saying, quote, "There is nothing in here for you. We refuse to fill it with our labor," end quote. The other side is desperately trying to stuff the box with character-shaped sausages to prove they still have a reason to exist. It's a mocking, cynical cycle, where the only winner is the cold logic of a system that views human connection as an inefficient use of time. We've commodified care to the point where a simple lunch has become a zero-sum game of cultural survival. It's not about rice and seaweed. It's about whether we still know how to do something for someone else without asking what's in it for me. A society that looks at a lunchbox and only sees unpaid labor is a society that has already received its empty box from the future. We are so busy arguing over the price of the effort that we've lost the value of the gesture. And in the end, when the boxes are all empty and the efficiency is at 100%, we might finally realize that you can't eat logic and you can't build a future on a foundation of pity and avoidance. We are trading our humanity for a smoother workflow. And honestly, it's the most expensive bargain we've ever made. Fuel the truth at dating in Korea, support the structure, stay safe in the lounge.